Shalom. Welcome to the Messianic Hour with Rabbi Scott Seculo. The Messianic Hour is a program designed to give you insight into the Jewish roots of your faith. Rabbi Scott is also here to answer your questions and help you gain a deeper understanding of Bible prophecy. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Scott Seculo.
Shalom and welcome to another edition of the Messianic Hour. I'm your host, Rabbi Scott. I'm here with my wife, Judy. This show is dedicated to reaching the lost and educating the found. I almost said sound. That didn't make sense. But we have a great show for you today, and we have to apologize. Last week we had to run a best of. It was not our intention, but just before we got ready to record the show, a tragedy happened here in Atlanta. We had a squirrel that committed suicide, and it took out our power. He died a noble cause, but he definitely died.
You're having too much fun.
I am having too much. We were cracking up all last week, but we're glad to be back with no squirrels around.
Yeah, it actually took our power out for several hours, so we were unable to get the show recorded. So we're going to go forward today. We're going to pick up back on where we were going through the Torah portion and showing Yeshua in it. We're going to talk about some Tu B'Shevat, which is basically the Jewish Arbor Day. So a lot of things on the docket today. And
also, Judy, we've had some things happening in Israel. We had elections, and Netanyahu narrowly won, not re-election, he won, but his coalition. They do things a little different in Israel. You have to have a majority, and while he did get the majority, it was a lot closer than they thought. Matter of fact, we're putting out an email newsletter that you'll be able to get on this to tell you a little bit more about it. But it was very interesting. Also in the news, Judy, McDonald's had a lawsuit because one of their restaurants in Detroit, besides doing their regular meat, sells, because it's one of the largest Muslim populations, they sell what's called halal food. And the lawsuit went out against them because they were actually using non-halal food
and passing it off
as halal. But it really brings up an interesting point, because what we're seeing in our society today is this halal food all around. And I get this question asked, should believers eat halal food? And the answer is no, because it's being offered up to a false god. It's being offered up to Allah. While it's made in a very similar way, the blessing that is put over it is in the name of Allah, and of course Allah is not the same God as Adonai, and therefore we should not eat it. One of the big problems we have here in Atlanta, Judy, is most of the lamb products that we see is made in from halal meat from Australia. I think it's where they come from.
Australia or New Zealand.
Or New Zealand. And so you can't eat it. So something to watch out for. And that's why you got to be paying attention to what's going on. We don't want those false gods entering us as well. Again, on the show, we're going to be looking at the book of Genesis, chapters 12 through about 16. So you want to get your Bibles out. We're going to be talking about the covenant God makes with Abraham. And on the second part of the show, again, we're going to talk about the special Arbor Day and how you can bless Israel. We're doing a special fund. Stay tuned. Check out RabbiScott.com for more information. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the Messianic Hour. I'm Judy Seculo, and I'm glad that you're listening to us today. Here comes the sound part that Rabbi was trying to throw in earlier when he said sound instead of found. But we are glad that you're watching and listening to us today. We're going to still pick up in Genesis 12, chapter 12 through, I think, chapter 17, going off the top of my head, which can be a little scary sometimes.
It is correct.
We're actually at the point where we're talking about the ultimate blessing. And this is the blessing of Abraham, where Adonai tells him that he's going to be basically the father of the Jewish people, and that all nations will come basically to know Messiah through him. And it's kind of interesting where it's really clear that Scripture tells us how we're blessed, and that we are blessed through Abraham, and those that, bless the Jewish people, which are his descendants, are blessed, and those that curse the Jewish people are cursed. And we see that God's really singling out
But not just Abraham, because if you've done with Abraham, then all of his offspring would be where the blessing comes from. But that's not the case. Matter of fact, not only is that not the case, the Messiah has to come from only one part of that. So we see how God has been kind of narrowing it down to bring us into this picture, as I must knock your mic out. But we see him now narrowing his blessings down to Abraham, and not only through Abraham, but Isaac, and then we're going to see Jacob, and then the 12 brothers. And then from the 12 brothers, we're going to see one particular family, one particular tribe, then family, and then ultimately see how that all comes in to point to our Messiah. So we really see this narrowing effect that's very important to understand. It's only through Isaac, not Ishmael, the blessings are not given. Very important to realize that.
And we see that really Messiah coming the first time, and then we know he's going to come the second time, that Messiah is the ultimate fulfillment of those promises to Abraham. And, Messiah is the vehicle which Israel will ultimately become the kind of light to the nations that she was called to be. So, when you're talking about a narrowing down, we're actually, if you're kind of looking at it, it's tunnel vision. It's coming all the way down to Messiah. Messiah is the ultimate blessing that's been promised to Abraham.
But Judy, not only is there that spiritual blessing, there's the land blessing as well. God promises the land of what we call Israel to the Jewish people. It's actually bigger than what it is right now. In fact, if we had all the land that God had promised to Israel, we wouldn't be paying the Arabs the money for our oil. We'd be paying Israel and receiving a blessing because you're blessing the land. But we see how that connection comes in as well. So there's a land blessing as well that God promises him this land, and it's not a sale. God says, "This is my land. I'm letting you use it," and we see that as well.
And it's interesting to see that the land, and we're going to talk about a little bit about this with Tu B'Shevat, is again another aspect of that blessing, and that Abraham's descendants are, even while they're given the land, God still says, there's going to be a time you're not going to be there. But ultimately, that the land never changes.
Right. It's still God's land. Ownership never changed. The Palestinians claim, it's theirs. Israel was there before the Palestinians. And Israel, when it goes to conquer the land, literally does that. It goes and takes it over when God promises them that the land will be done. He's going to make a promise to Abraham that's going to be fulfilled through his offspring, that this land is given. And that's really interesting, too, because God's promise to Abraham is that he'll be fruitful, but the promise of the land actually comes to the great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, if you want to look at it that way, as God says, your offspring will go into a foreign land. They'll be there for 400 years. And here's the kicker, Judy. When they leave, they'll leave with silver and gold, with wealth. Normally, when people go out of a land, they leave with nothing but what's on the back of their shirt, what they can carry, no values. But yet, when we see, as we go into the chapters, we're going to see Israel, the people of Israel, coming out of Egypt with great wealth. Why? Because God promised them again, I will bless those who bless my people, and I will curse those who curse them.
And I think God knew that there had to be a large piece of real estate to handle this nation. A nation that's going to be large is going to need a large piece of land. Now, we know right now that Israel doesn't occupy all of it. We know at one point in time they will. But I think the one thing that we need to when you're talking about how God has singled this all out and now brought it to Abraham and Sarah, is, I think, to touch just a little bit on like the replacement theology, because there's people who want to say, well, the church has replaced this, or they just don't like the fact that God has actually called one particular person, and then based on that, a particular group of people, he's singled them out. But that's what he did, and his word doesn't change. And even if we don't think it's fair or we don't like it or whatever, it doesn't change the fact that this is what God said, and that
great point.
We have to deal with this. And yes, Yeshua came to love, and Yeshua came for all, but he came for his people too.
And Judy, one thing to notice with the covenant that God makes with Abraham, remember he uses Near Eastern traditions and symbolism so that Abraham can understand it. Something that we, looking from the 21st century back, might not get as much, but back then Abraham knew exactly what's going on. I remember when I went through Bible college, this was one of the first things we studied, and the fact that he cut the animal in half, but that only God walks through the animal. Now, what does that mean? If we were back at the time of Abraham, and we were to make a contract, we would kill an animal, slice it in half, and what the meaning was that if we were to break this contract, what happened to that animal would happen to us. That, I think if we did that today in our society, we'd have a lot less people breaking contracts.
Well, and it's not really... I understand why you're using the word contract, because that's what people understand. But this was really a covenant.
Right.
And a covenant has much higher responsibilities. It has a higher connotation to it. And what we have to remember is that God is a covenant-keeping God.
Right.
He made a covenant with Abraham. We can't break that covenant. We can't say that covenant doesn't exist just because we don't like it. And the one thing we need to be glad that God's a covenant-keeping God is, let's go back to Noah real quick and the flood. In the world that we live in today,
right,
with all the sin and everything going on with that, we better be glad God said he wasn't going to bring a flood again, because we'll probably do one,
right,
with our own behavior and with the roads that we're going down and turning away from Torah. So we better be glad that God keeps his covenants.
And one thing I want to bring back to is that the covenant that he makes, it's a one-sided covenant. Mm-hmm. This covenant is God knows man's not going to be able to do his part. That's why he doesn't go through the animal. But God says, even though you will not do what you're supposed to do, I will do what I'm supposed to do, and I will keep this covenant even though you won't. And that's one of the reasons why he knows he has to send ultimately the Messiah, God in the flesh, so that we can renew that covenant, so that we can come together and be with him.
And, and God made a place for the nations too. Yes, his covenant is with Israel. You're going to bring forth my Messiah. You're going to occupy this land. This land is yours. But he provides a place for the nations, and the nations join the remnant. Right. They don't replace the remnant.
Right. And those who bless Israel, those nations that bless Israel all through the centuries, have been blessed. So not only do they come alongside them, they can receive that blessing as well. And then we know as the engrafting in through Messiah, which is through who? Abraham. It's so interesting to see that when it says when you're engrafted into Abraham, that we see that connection come to place, because there you're receiving the same blessing that the firstborn did. You're not a second-class citizen. You're not a stepchild if you're a Gentile. You're equal co-heirs. You get the same land. You get the same blessings. You get the same inheritance. Not as a lesser, but equal. But also not as a greater than as well, as many in the church likes to think, oh, we have replaced Israel, we're the greater. No, it's an equal co-heir, and that's important to realize.
And it's interesting just to remember that the covenant ceremony was basically really intended to assure Abraham that God intended to keep his word, but the prophecy that came along with it was intended to assure Abraham's descendants.
That's right. Judy, when we're going to come back, we're going to be looking at
Tu B'Shevet.
But I want to encourage our listening audience, go to our website, rabbiscott.com, sign up for our newsletter. You get a free gift, a book, I Have a Friend Who's Jewish to You, and a prophecy card. You can also follow us on Twitter at Rabbi_Scott, and also check us out on your Android. We have an Android app and a iPhone and Apple product app. Check those stores out. You can search Rabbi Scott or the Messianic Hour. And soon we're going to be on the Roku station as well. We have a Roku channel, so we'll tell you more about that later on. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.